Hello everyone. My name is Vikram, and I welcome you all to the fourth episode of the GISB Podcast series, which is a GISB initiative. Through this podcast, we interview various leading sports management professionals within their area of expertise, and we plan to support people to enhance their knowledge of the business of sport and how they can create a meaningful career in the global sports industry. Coming to the topic for today's discussion. So we know that years ago, sports sponsorship and partnerships were by and far a feel-good expenditure for brands. But things have changed over the years. Extremely important for these to have a good understanding of why our brands even partnering with them. If you look at India, the sport that comes into everyone's mind, we look at the go-to partnership, which is also my favorite sport is cricket. So this kind of leads us to our topic for today's discussion, which is how to build meaningful brand partnerships in the business of cricket. And the guest that we have with us today is the best person to talk to on this topic, Lina Staropoli. To give you a bit of background about our guest, Lina is a global sponsorship professional with more than 15 years of experience in the field of sponsorship and partnership. She has done some amazing work with Cricket Australia, where she has been working for the past 5 years. And we'll talk about some of her works as we converse in this podcast. But before that, before she worked with Cricket Australia, she worked with some of the biggest organizations like Major League Soccer and Soccer United Marketing, and with Swimming Australia. Apart from this, also she has worked with few other organizations away from sports, but primarily in the role of partnerships and sponsorship. So on that note, I extend a very warm welcome to you, Lina, and I thank you so much for taking your time out today for joining me in this podcast.
Thanks very much, Vikram. I'm very excited to chat to you.
Yeah, same here, Lina. So let's start our conversation with a not so difficult question, I suppose, like before moving on to the serious stuff. So what made you decide that you wish to pursue a career in sport?
Oh, wow. I wish I could remember the exact thing. It feels like so long ago. I think for me, there was a few things that I was trying when I finished with high school. I decided potentially to go into journalism or into some sort of humanities-based area. I'd studied an arts degree initially, and I thought I was going to land somewhere in and around marketing or administration. And I took the journalism course, which was a funny thing here in Australia. You have to sit an entrance exam, and there was about, I don't know, 300 or 400 people sitting this exam, and I got there and you had to write an essay in like 20 minutes or something. And there was all this kind of pressure in the room. I was, 17 at the time when I went and did it. And I just thought to myself, do I really want to sit and write at a deadline every week in, week out, and kind of always chasing stories. And I was like, I really loved writing, but did I love it enough to do it every day? And, I can't, a 17-year-old me, I'm not 100% sure what she was thinking, but something, the thing that came to mind is like the one thing that I really do enjoy and that I'm passionate about and keeps me engaged. Like I don't kind of like it for a little bit and go off was sport. And I was playing at a very, very amateur level, but I was playing football at the time. I'd played a bit of tennis and I'd played through high school. And I thought, yeah, this is something that I really enjoy, and I enjoy the experience of it when I go. And there might be something in it, that's a bit more long term for me than just writing to deadlines. And this is my vision of what a journalist did, rightly or wrongly. So yeah, it was just in that moment of just trying to decide what it is that I enjoyed and kept me engaged. And sport was that reoccurring theme in a lot of my other interests, So I think that was probably the moment.
Somewhat similar to the realization that most of the individuals who plan to shift to sport have during their 18, 19s, but a brave decision to actually shift to sports. So
Yeah, it is actually when you say it that way, especially sort of 10 or 15 years ago, or 15 or 20 years ago, I should say, when I was at school. It wasn't at the moment here in Australia, there's 3 or 4 degrees that you can do in sports admin. Each university offers something. And of course, there's the international master's programs like yours. And there's a lot more specialisation around sports administration than it was back when I was doing it. We had one university offered a graduate diploma in sport and recreation management, which I went on to do. And then it was just about getting into the industry. You just had to kind of get into the area that you were trying to look in. And that's why I started off in development programs. I wasn't, in partnerships from the beginning, just trying to grow different sports. And I worked at lawn bowls for a little bit. I worked in a gym that had a kind of public facing sports program. So there were lots of little areas before I kind of found my way into this commercial side and the sponsorship side.
All right, interesting. So, talking about the start of your career, so you joined MLS during the initial stages of the league, and MLS was not as renowned as it is during your time at MLS. So, how did MLS successfully leverage brand partnerships to grow their reach within US? Could you just talk a bit about that as well?
Sure. I was really lucky. I literally turned up in New York at Major League Soccer a couple of months after David Beckham was signed. So in the summer of 2007. And, you can't underestimate the swell of or the turning point that signing was for Major League Soccer and for soccer in the US. And, I tell this story a lot when I got there, and people would say to me, where are you from? Because obviously I've got a distinctive accent. I'd say, I'm from Australia. What are you doing here? And I'd say, I'm working at Major League Soccer. And people would say, what's that? Or where's that? They literally had no idea what it was or what it did. And then over the course of that 5 years, I'd get the same question, and people would say to me, do you know what's wrong with soccer? Or do you know what soccer needs? Or, everyone had an opinion suddenly about this game that a few years ago they didn't know anything about, or weren't as interested or engaged in it, right? That wasn't, the majority of people didn't even know that there was a soccer league, let alone, one that had been around for a few years. So, yeah, that David Beckham's signing was really the turning point for that league in its entirety and for soccer in the US. I think from a commercial standpoint, the search for commercial dollars is difficult wherever you go, right? Even some of you see the big sports like the NFL and even AFL in Australia. It feels like there's always these big partners, but they're not easy deals to land because you've got to find that right connection point. So I think, strategically back then for Major League Soccer, it was really getting people through the door. So you needed the big brands to come through the door. So the business development team was super active in, trying to get the big categories. So car category, beer category, airline. But once they were in, a lot of the strategy was around retention and growth. And it seems pretty straightforward, but it's not an easy thing to do in a marketing environment, because marketing strategies change for big brands. They're not always committed long term because they've got an idea, they buy the assets they need to promote that idea, and if after a couple of years the idea changes, they move on to the next thing, right? That's the basics of kind of marketing and the like. But the benefit that Major League Soccer had, or the thing they had in their corner, is that they owned a lot of different assets. So Soccer United Marketing was the commercial arm, owned by all the Major League Soccer owners. They built this, they started this company so they could get the World Cup, the 2002 World Cup played on TV, because it doesn't seem like that long ago, but in 2002, no one was going to show the World Cup in the US, not ESPN, not NBC. So the owners got together, formed this company, got the rights from FIFA, and then went to ESPN and said, please play this, essentially. And will bear the burden of the advertising shortfall if no one picks this up. And then turned out to be a huge success. The US did really well. Global brands know about the World Cup, so they soaked up the advertising inventory there, and then it caused this huge whirlwind that the next year people were fighting for the rights to broadcast the World Cup. But at that point, Soccer United Marketing owned it and had now had leverage in this product that they could then go on board and sell. So from Soccer United Marketing, they managed the commercial rights for Major League Soccer, but also for US soccer. And for the Mexican national team, they did a 5-game tour of the US each summer, purely friendlies, but they would sell out huge stadiums. They sell out the Rose Bowl, 100,000 people easily. Go to Texas and sell out all the stadiums there. So they started to build this cachet of international events. And everyone that, if you wanted to bring an international team to the States, you had to play in a soccer stadium, which was owned by usually leased or owned by one of the MLS clubs, therefore the owner. Therefore, Soccer United Marketing had first right of refusal for that tour. So they controlled a lot of the soccer content that came into the US, and they professionalized it in a way that the delivery was fantastic and the commercialization was top notch. So they would have fan festivals, all the bits and pieces that made the fan experience one of the best sporting experiences in the country. So to be able to offer a commercial partner that comes in and says, "Oh, I want to be an MLS partner," and we had, a few of them. One of them was mine, Allstate Insurance. So, and it's like, that's great, come in. And then we'd say to them, look how great you've done with Major League Soccer. When it comes time for renewal, let's look at the Mexican national team. Let's look at the US national team. Then they also got the rights to the Gold Cup and CONCACAF events. They did a few international tours where Manchester United came over and Juventus came over, and they played like an intra-club. And they were all friendlies, but they were events, they were entertainment options around football. And, it was that retention piece and growing the properties and giving brands this expanded footprint where soccer or football was the uniting theme, but you were talking to Hispanic consumers, you were talking to American consumers, you were talking to teenagers, you were talking to women. So you could, if you owned across all of these properties, you could do different campaigns to talk to these different fan groups, with the uniting factor being your one theme about your contribution to soccer or football in that country. And to me, if I look back on it, that was the standout, because many of the partners that I managed started off as quite small sponsorships. You just got to try and get them through the door. But once they were there, Allstate expanded, the Home Depot I was on also expanded. I think we had Volkswagen at the time, but I think it might be Audi now. Is still a partner after sort of 10 or 15 years. They're all part of the same parent group. These are really long-term committed partnerships that see the value in having this owning as sport almost in its entirety, when you can speak to all the different demographics that the fan base makes up within those properties. So that's to me probably the piece of the strategy that gives them longevity, right? They're not always having to go to market. If you can renew someone that you've already got for an extra 4 years, that's 6 or 12 months that you don't have to spend trying to chase a whole new brand that doesn't know. You have to go in and sell, right? You have to go and teach them about what soccer can bring, how it can help them talk to their fan group. So renewal and retention, I think, is probably the key.
Yeah, some great points here about renewal and retention. I think that the aspect of long-term partnerships also plays a big role. And I think the fact that the way the brand partnerships happened for MLS has also contributed to the growth of soccer within the country.
Definitely.
And the fact that what's interesting is that we have seen more growth in women's soccer in US. Mm-hmm. And so why do you think that this came about, the growth of women's soccer in US particularly?
Oh, wow, that's a multi-layered question and answer, I think. Look, women's soccer was at a participation level, and even in Australia, I'm not sure about in India, but definitely in Australia, is one of the highest participant sports for women and girls. And then we lose something between that. Maybe it's the pathway or this transition to creating an established league and then having it be commercialized. And I think we're starting to turn the corner on that. And that is essentially around investment from the governing bodies to put on games, to professionalize and have the athletes be able to compete at a level that makes the product enticing and makes it, a true entertainment spectacle. And I think it's the investment broadcast and getting the visibility that you need. I think they're the first pillars to success, because the commercial component really comes after you've tried and tested it, and they know that there's some guarantee of ROI. There's some really great brands out there that supporting women's sport is part of their social and community responsibility policies, and they want to give back, which is fantastic. But it's also quite limiting, because it's treating the sport a bit like a social cause rather than building it for its entertainment and commercial value. Right now, one's not better than the other, but it's just where do you want the sport to go, and how do you want it to reach its potential? And I think commercially, that's where you need that ongoing investment. I think with the US piece in particular, and it's timely because the Matildas are playing tonight in the Olympic semi-final. I'm not sure how they go, but the success of the US women's team is probably key also to that explosion of the growth of the leagues over there. And you can't go past it. If your teams are performing well, it translates throughout the system. I think too, when we talk about investment from the governing bodies, look at investment from the perspective of playing athletes so they can professionalise. That's one piece, but also investing in things like PR and communications and digital platforms. And I think that the US soccer is a case study for how they promote and build the profile of their players through their digital content and just the exciting stuff, the ability to keep fans engaged and just interested in the team and who they are, has had them, like, I'm still interested, and I'm, haven't been there for a few years now, but I can tell you most of the US team right now better than I can the Matildas. And that's purely from just following them on social media. I haven't been able to watch as many games as they play, as I did when I was over there, or, I don't have that ability to chase that knowledge as I would if I was in the US and it was being, given to me in daily media. So, that investment is twofold. It's financial, and it's about building the quality of the team and the quality of the product, but it's also about building the profile of the players and having them be a presence out in the world and out, with their fans. That it doesn't guarantee success, but it definitely helps grow the supporter base, because the supporter base are the ones that are going to skew brands into wanting to invest, right? You want to know that people are going to buy your products. If people are listening when you tell them about your product, then the people that are listening are all following this sport or this player or this entertainment piece. So, yeah, that's purely my own 2 cents on that. Nothing coming from any authority there, but that's just kind of my perception of its growth.
Look, quite interesting, and I kind of agree with whatever you say. Like the fact that the shift to digital and the putting players as brands is an important thing right here. So
Yeah.
now moving to the next phase of your career. So
Yeah.
you overlooked the partnership for Swimming Australia.
Yep.
So like I want to understand like what sort of partnerships did brands look at when it comes to a niche sport like swimming, which is also an individual sport. So
Yeah.
I kind of want to understand the difference between a team and an individual sport and a sport like a niche sport like swimming. So how does that come?
Yeah, I think that so swimming in Australia is huge. Like you've probably seen at the moment, it's our most successful Olympic performing sport, and Australians just they love it. I guess we're an island, so everyone loves swimming and going to the beach and all that sort of fun stuff. So it's just historically, it's just been one of a very strong sport from a participation standpoint, but also fans being engaged with the sport. But it does only happen, really, this climax of people's nationalism and spirit around swimming only really happens every 4 years around the Olympics. You get a short burst around Commonwealth Games, and I joke a little bit about the Commonwealth Games. The only reason we haven't become a republic, in my opinion, is because then we wouldn't be able to go to the Com Games, because we definitely dominate when we go. And then there's the World Swimming Championships. There's a few events here and there, but nothing to the magnitude of that gets the coverage that or the TV exposure that the Olympics gets. So the biggest challenge commercially is to keep the sport relevant when the Olympics aren't happening. And 4 years is a long time to try and keep player profiles and who are your leading players. You see them. We saw them in Rio. And then we've got a whole bunch of new faces now in Tokyo. And there's great stories around the people that we recognise, like the Kate Campbells and the Emily Seabohms and, Mitch Larkin. We recognise them because we recognise them for Rio, but we haven't seen them in the last 5 years, right? We haven't, unless you're a die-hard, passionate fan. And again, to your point, that's a very niche group. So, the challenge with that commercially is that balance between, we had a couple of really big corporate partners. So we had Speedo, naturally, in my time, I think it's Arena now. It's a natural fit, right? It's a particularly niche sport with a niche equipment requirements. So they're always both companies big supporters of swimming. And then we had at the time Optus, which is a telecommunications company here in Australia, came on as a big partner, and the other is still Hancock Prospecting, which is a big mining conglomerate. It's not a conglomerate really. It's owned by Gina Reinhardt, and the reason they support swimming is purely philanthropic. Mrs. Reinhardt loves swimming. She loves the Olympic sports. She supports a number of other ones, and she chooses to do that through funding, and she's quite a generous donor to swimming and a couple of other Olympic sports. So it's a difficult balance when you've got some big commercial brands and then you've got a philanthropic band that also has contributed a lot, and you want to give them the same exposure. It's like how do you create initiatives to be able to support them, because they've got very different ideas of what success looks like for them in their partnership. So I think the biggest challenge, and I think swimming's starting to address it now, is just how do you bridge the gap between Olympic Games and keeping people interested in the sport and keeping it relevant when you've got Australian rules football and you've got that goes regularly, you've got cricket that happens regularly, dominating the news cycles. How do you keep swimming relevant? And I think they're working on a concept at the moment with the Australian Swimming Leagues. So they're trying to create a league-based team and league-based version of swimming to have regular meets and sort of create that longevity around it, which, if they can get the structure right to that, sounds like a fantastic concept. Other than that, I think it remains, if I had the answer, maybe I could probably be very rich right now to go in and solve that problem for most Olympic sports. To be honest, it's hard to kind of maintain that commercial value and growth between Olympic cycles. I'm not sure if I've 100% answered your question there. I don't think I have the answer.
You definitely did. You definitely did. And I think this is, as you mentioned, the problem with most of the Olympic sports, just to bridge that gap within the years of those 4 years where there is no action happening. So I think the idea of a league for swimming is a good idea, and let's see how it goes. It would be a good example for other sports as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder too, like the answer is not always to introduce another league, because in Australia, for example, we're a very small population and we're saturated with sport. It's a tough market for our biggest sports. Look at cricket and the Big Bash, and Australian rules football and rugby probably dominates. So, for a sport like swimming, who introduces a league, how do you then break into a very cluttered market with a small population? Really, I think we play out of our weight range with our population side versus our fandom for sport. But it'll be an interesting case study to see how they go about that, and how they build this in a cluttered market.
Yeah, right. So now, Lina, coming to the main part of our discussion about cricket. So now, after swimming, you moved. Your career saw you working with Cricket Australia as a corporate partnership manager. Yeah. And initially you were working for the Big Bash League and the Women's Big Bash League. Now, what was your approach to finding the correct partnerships for the league that is in line with their brand identities?
I think I'm kind of fortunate. I had a little bit of a hand in it. We have a separate team that does a lot of the business development side and going out to find the partnerships. And when I got to cricket, we had a full commercial stack of partners. So we kept our commercial structure quite limited. We wanted to keep it quite clean. So the Big Bash had 4 national partners and 2 team partners per club, right? So it was very clean. We tried to maximise the assets for those 6 partners, and hopefully charge a premium for those, because their share of voice was so specific, right? So there wasn't a lot of, we didn't sell signage and we didn't sell all these little bits and pieces. We kept it quite clean, and tried to maintain the integrity of that share of voice, which is getting more and more challenging. I think after 10 years, we've seen those ratios slightly increase. I think clubs have an extra partner now, but national partners are still at 4, which it makes it challenging in some regards, because it's a very small commercial program, but it also means that if those partners keep renewing, like the likes of KFC and Toyota, then it creates demand in the marketplace, because other brands can't get in. Like, everyone wants to be part of Big Bash, but it's not an easy entry point, right? Because those, again, that retention and renewal piece, if you can create longevity, then you continue to build. So, I can't say I had an enormous amount to do with sourcing those partners, but I think ultimately in any corporate environment, it's going to sound a bit bad, but you can't necessarily be too fussy when it comes to brand and brand partnerships. And it's probably the one thing that I've seen cricket do that I haven't seen most other sports do, and that's the Big Bash is a family entertainment product. It's particularly skewed at families, so they've made a conscious choice not to allow any gaming partners. So betting partners are not allowed, and they won't have an alcohol partner. And that's probably the main strategic choice in terms of the 2 categories that they felt just weren't aligned with the brand values of this particular form of cricket. Now, Cricket Australia as a whole has relationships with both beer and to a lesser extent betting agencies, just because there's a lot of integrity work around cricket and maintaining the integrity of cricket. But you'll see Bet365 on the bolsters around the ground, on the rope. And probably on some digital stuff, but that's the extent of it, because clearly betting and cricket, don't have a very good history. So around the world, not just in Australia. So that's probably been the main strategic point where we've said these are the two categories that we've got to be careful around, because it impacts the integrity of our sport. For the rest, it's really an open dialogue with what's available out there in the market, who's willing to invest, what dollars they're willing to invest, and what assets we have to offer that complements what they want to do with the program. And, a lot of times, the marketing managers will come and, they'll want to do a deal, and they just want access to certain players, or, we just can't offer that, because there's an MOU in place. There's a really strict enterprise bargaining agreement with the players. So there's rules around how you can use IP and how you can leverage their imagery and stuff that doesn't fit what brands want to do. It might suit them better to go and do a media buy and just buy some ad time. So there's a lot of those conversations about what do you actually want to do, and can the assets we have to offer you help you get to that. And if they don't align, and a lot of the times they don't, one or both of parties will walk away. But in the instance that it does, that's once you go through that process and you kind of have to stick to what your principles are in that area, you end up with the cachet partners that we've got really have, the longevity of them. Like KFC's been around for 10 years. Toyota's been around for longer than that across international cricket as well. Yeah. So there's a lot of once you're in, there's a lot of retention and wanting to stay around, because the brand's strategy and the cricket strategy align.
Yeah, interesting. So Lina, just to follow up with this, so you were working with both the Big Bash League and the Women's Big Bash League. So did you observe any differences while finding partners for the women and the men version of the particular league?
Yeah, look, I think the Big Bash League, the men's has been around for 10 years, right? So it's got a bit more of a history behind it, not as much as some of the other leagues that we're competing against. I mean, AFL's been around for 100 years. So, and that you're trying to create the fan connections, you're trying to create rivalries, you're trying to create the brand points that help draw partners in and give you a selling point. So when I was working on the women's Big Bash, it was only 3 or 4 years in. So we were still trying to build a narrative around what this league was, what it stood for, and how it could be of value to partners in terms of leveraging their brand and connecting with fans. So that was the difference in the approach, where one was more about partners coming on this journey about being able to build a league from the beginning almost. And then the Big Bash, the other end of that, is jumping on board this rocket ship essentially that was growing and growing year on year. So there were two very different brand positions. I think the sophistication of the brands that wanted to be involved with the different leagues was probably one of the other points, because the WBBL was still growing. You had brands are a lot more risk averse, right? It's hard to throw a big pile of money at something that may still not work or may take a couple of years to work, right? It's not going to work in that marketing cycle. So, and that takes a lot of brands out of the equation. Like, a lot of brands need instant results. You need to show your brand campaign works in this financial year, for you to keep your job, but also, you need to be able to continue to invest and grow your product. And I found there was probably not a lot of brands willing to take that, put your money where your mouth is financial risk in supporting the women's sports in general, and in particular the WBBL. And I haven't been close enough to it over the last couple of years, and COVID certainly had an impact. But my sense is that there's that changing. The landscape is changing in that regard. But it's not easy to get people to separate from their dollars without some level of certainty. And for a new league in a new area, which is women's sport, that was probably the biggest difference between trying to sell that and sell the BBL.
Yeah, got it. So Lina, about the Big Bash League. So when we talk about the biggest cricket league in the world, we maybe talk about IPL. But when it comes to women's cricket, I think it's the women's Big Bash League. So how has the audience received the women's Big Bash League, or what do they perceive the women's Big Bash League as?
I think my own personal perception in just watching it grow over the last couple of years is that people are initially surprised at the quality of the league and the quality of the players and the quality of the competition, right? The stories that come out of, close finishes. It's not just an easy, one or two teams aren't dominating. It's quite even. And to me, the WBBL is, I don't want to call it a purer form of cricket, but it's, there's mistakes and there's, there's close finishes, and the pressure still gets to these players. They're only just starting to professionalise, so they haven't been playing professionally for, since they were 15, or like some of the men, had come out of, school and into cricket programs, and they're professionalised to a certain degree quite early, right? Whereas for the women, this is all quite new. Only in the last 3 years has the pay been equalised, and they've got the opportunity to train full time as professional athletes. So it's actually quite enjoyable to watch. That it's not this purely clinical. Like you like watching elite sport, and when you watch some of the men performing, it's very clinical. It's very rare Mitch Starc makes a mistake when he's bowling, right? Comes in, bang, 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 and there is an error. It does create its own kind of excitement. With the women, there's the level of technical abilities there, but then there's the pressure of needing, 6 runs off the final ball, and there's not always that same certainty as there is with men's sport, and I think that creates excitement. People are intrigued by that, and there's a lot more stories and narratives you can build out of those close finishes or those heroic moments. And I don't know if you remember that game in one of the World Cup games, one of the WBBL semi-finals 2 years ago, and Elise Perry, the Sixers are playing, she bowls, it's the last bowl of the over, and they, it's gone, the batter's hit it, it's gone for maybe 3 runs, but the fielding was a save on the boundary, absolute rocket into Alyssa Healy. She's gone stumps down one end, run out down the other end, and it's like, everyone's going, that is fantastic. On the edge of your seat stuff, you want to tune in again to see what's happening in the final. And I think, you can't, that anticipation is what I think is still, quite new and exciting.
Yeah.
And we miss that a little bit across, some of the more, existing sports that have been around for a long time. Yeah.
So like you mentioned about Elise Perry and a few of these stars. Yeah. So I believe that Cricket Australia's women national team has been quite successful in creating stars out of these players, these Australian players. So, and I believe that, as you mentioned about the growth of women's sport in USA as well, like women's football in USA as well, it's about creating stars out of those athletes. So, what do you think like countries can look to do or create heroes out of their female athletes, so that it helps in the growth and development of women's cricket or women's sports within their country?
Yeah, I don't think you can necessarily manufacture that. I think the best stories or the so-called heroes come organically, right, out of just being able to see the action. So the more these games are televised, the more access fans have to go and watch, is part and parcel of building that celebrity and building that status. And also, being able to supply suitable competition so that Elise Perry is performing at her best. If Elise Perry is just bowling and getting wicket after wicket after wicket, there's no real competition there, right? You want to see a batter try and push Elise to her best, and then you want to see her succeed, or you want to see the batter succeed. Like there's got to be the right level of competition to support those stars, and then the occasional narrative where they triumph, right? You want to create those storylines. But I think we talked about before, the building of the players' profiles is really important. And we've got this, it's either a blessing or a curse, social media. It depends when you ask me. On different days, I have different opinions about whether it's good or bad. But, social media is a great platform. It's a bit different. It speaks to different groups and different peoples, and you create fans out of people that wouldn't traditionally be sports fans, right? Because they engage with the players, in their downtime, or if they're posting things, not necessarily just based on their cricket, or their sport prowess. So again, if you find a way to build a player's profiles and not just focus in on one, have this breadth of player familiarity, the narratives will come out in the sport itself, right? As you play, stories will naturally come out because that competitive nature will, create close finishes or, amazing catches on the boundary, that sort of stuff. And if you already kind of know a player and then you see her do this extraordinary thing on the field, your interest continues to grow, right? So, but I think it's got to happen organically. If you try and manufacture that stuff, it's either really short-term, it's a short-term burst of interest, doesn't really, create loyal and long-term fans, and it can kind of work against you. So, it's a hard question to answer, but I'd say just that organic building of profiles and just making sure that people are getting access to see the product.
Yeah, I kind of agree to the fact that the process has to be organic and it has to be a combination of what's been done off the field and on the field. So that people can actually relate to what's happening off the field. Otherwise, as you mentioned, it will be a short burst.
Yeah, absolutely.
So now moving on to the fact that you are now working with Cricket Australia. Mm-hmm. So, and previously you were working with the Women's Big Bash League and the Big Bash League. So what kind of differences do you observe while handling partnerships for a national team and a league?
Look, it's not too different, to be honest. I mean, it's all under the umbrella of Cricket Australia. So my partners when I first started, were mostly Big Bash partners. I had a couple that were, so KFC, for example, has rights in international cricket. So I kind of did a little bit in international cricket. Now, as we've kind of adjusted our partnership portfolio, my partners are mostly international partners. So I've got Vodafone, for example, as a naming rights partner for the Test series, and got a Linter and Dedol and those guys who are all platinum partners. It's a little bit different when you're focused on one. And I know we've got different products with Test and T20 and ODIs, but it's essentially international cricket as a whole is kind of one set of maybe, 10 or so games, as opposed to a league where you're juggling 8 different teams and 156, I think, altogether, women's and men's, like 156 games in the season. So, and from an international perspective, we control the marketing, the voice, how the team's going to be marketed. And then you can go to partners and you say, this is the made of campaign, right? This is about what we're made of, and how do you want to leverage your partnership? Whereas with the Big Bash leagues, the league itself didn't have its own stringent identity. What we would say is, like, we've got this entertainment product. we've gone out and specifically made sure that each team has its own personality, does its own thing, has its own game fan experience, because that's what, it's going to make the league successful. So I think that's probably the biggest difference, is that even though you've got men's and women's international and you've got T20, ODI and Test, it's pretty fundamentally the themes are the same, right? And you're focused on two big teams, 20 or so athletes on each, maybe a bit more. It's probably 50 athletes on each when you take in consideration different products. But it's a lot more centralized, I think. It's a lot more focused. And that can be good and bad, There's moments where it kind of stifles creativity a little bit, because, we're always talking about Australia and what it means to represent the baggy green, whereas in BBL, you could, go to the Sixers and say, we want to do this great campaign, and then do something totally different in Perth, So it just, sometimes on both ends, sometimes it can create flexibility and other times it can create sort of a bit of congestion up there. So yeah, it's certainly a different focus in terms of what you can offer partners from an activation standpoint.
Yeah, all right. So Lina, coming to a final question, the question that has to be a part of every conversation nowadays, the COVID era. So how has the brand partnerships been affected due to COVID for both the league and the team, the Cricket Australia and the Women's Big Bash League and the Big Bash League? And how do you see these brand partnerships, or the nature of these partnerships, changing in a post-COVID era?
Oh wow, yeah, that's a big question. I think what COVID's forced us all to do is to reconsider what it means to leverage, what assets that you need to be able to leverage your partnership successfully, because most partnerships will be made up of tickets, hospitality, player access, kind of money can't buy experiences, and signage. And when something like COVID hits, that takes away 90% of those assets. So the only thing you could actually do last season was get your signage up for TV on the boundary. You couldn't guarantee that you could host your people in hospitality. We did near the end, into the men's Test series, we were able to host limited numbers, but how as a brand can you do a consumer-facing promo, in an in-store campaign, for example, where you win tickets or this great hospitality experience where I can't guarantee you that I can actually give you those hospitality tickets, right? So it forced a lot of brands, and it forced us to be quite creative in how we delivered assets and how we defined what was valuable and what wasn't, because a lot of the things just, they rolled over year on year. That's just what you offer. You offer these assets, and you do your campaign, you improve on the campaign from last year, but we don't really tweak the actual value offering. So the future, I don't know. I'd say it's there is a lot of contingency planning. You cannot go into a season without having a backup plan. That's definitely for sure. And it sounds fairly logical, why would you? But previously, there hasn't been a need, but there hasn't been the resources either. You put all your resources into your campaign. Once you decide, you put every cent into trying to make it work. You don't keep some money aside for a contingency plan in case you can't do a competition or a consumer-facing promo. So I think companies will start to, have to build in contingency plans and planning. And I think too, we'll have a moment where we'll have to look at the assets that we have available from a commercial perspective to sell, and have to have they're great assets, like tickets and hospitality. They're the premium part of most contracts. But what's the contingency on that, and what's the value proposition? So should happen, as we did with COVID, is the default to return money back, to give money back, like refund money, which would decimate most sports, right? If you're relying on $1 million from this partner and then at the end of the season you have to return $200K because you weren't able to deliver on tickets and hospitality because of COVID, that's a big chunk of revenue that, any sport, even in the big sports, no one can sneeze at that. You cannot sacrifice. Every penny is so important to the high performance structure, to me getting paid, the most important part. So I think there'll be a lot more discussion moving forward about assets, about contingencies for assets, and then agreement in advance about make goods and how you overcome any loss of value because of things like COVID and the COVID and biosecurity impacts.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Lina. I think with this, we come to the end of I'm done with all my questions, and we come to the end of this podcast. And I thank you so much for answering all my questions in so much detail. I think it will be extremely helpful for all of viewers who will be listening to this conversation, where you have talked about brand partnerships in so much detail and across geographies like US, Australia, and across leagues, teams. So thank you so much for sharing your experiences. I really appreciate you taking time out and joining me today.
Oh, my pleasure, Vikram. Thank you very much. It was a very nice conversation. I hope I wasn't too long-winded in my answers. It's
Not at all.
a lot of passion there for me, but definitely an interesting area to be part of. And I think I wish you and your classmates and those listening to the podcast every success in their careers in this industry, because it's certainly challenging, but also certainly a lot of fun, and we do bring a lot of enjoyment and joy to people watching and participating. So all the best to you as well.